Italy, surrounded by the sapphire blue Mediterranean, was once the heart of the mighty Roman Empire. In the ancient city of Pisa, a discovery was made that baffled archaeologists. 16 ancient boats were uncovered, complete with their cargo and the skeleton of a man and a dog. The man's foot was severed from the rest of his body, his arm desperately reaching out to his dog. Who was the human victim, and how did he and his dog die? What catastrophe could have brought them to their watery grave?
It may have been his own dog who saw him in trouble and then leapt to his master in an expression of concern for him, and they went down together.
They drowned within the space of a few minutes. It couldn't have been much longer.
It is a discovery of extraordinary importance for ancient history and archaeology in general.
Archaeologist Francesca Bertoldi is on an investigation to find out what happened to this person. Could this be the skeleton of an ancient mariner, pinned beneath the cargo of a Roman ship? What event brought about his death? An accident or a natural disaster? How did he lose his foot? Was the dog he reached out for in his last moments his loyal pet?
What I find intriguing in this story is that we can see the frozen moment of this man's death, and we can see also a gesture of love in this death.
Italy is steeped in history. But one particular archaeological discovery is considered one of the most important of recent years. About 500 yards from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, builders constructing new offices near the railway line uncovered the remains of several Roman ships. They soon realized that what they had unearthed was the remains of the long-lost Roman port of San Rossari, which had been crucial to Pisa's success in Roman times. Today, Pisa is considered one of Italy's major cultural cities. Its hub is a maze of red-roofed villas and impressive public architecture, displaying medieval and Islamic influences. The main attraction of the Piazza di Miracoli is the 6-story Leaning Tower. Its construction began in the 12th century, and soon after, soil subsidence caused it to lean. It is only just reopened to the public after reconstruction to make it safe. Alongside are the beautiful Gothic baptistry and the marble cathedral, which was constructed to the glorification of 12th century Pisan maritime prowess. Pisa was an important coastal city in ancient times. It developed thanks to its prime trading position at the junction of 2 rivers in a fluvial lagoon and its proximity to the sea. San Rossari was its main port. Then the distance between San Rossari and the sea was barely 3 miles. The coastline has receded over the centuries, so today the site lies 13 miles inland. This 11th century basilica, now on terra firma, is on the site of what was, in Roman times, a deep harbor, San Rossari. Dr. Stefano Bruni, former superintendent in charge of excavations in Tuscany, headed the archaeological team.
It is an extraordinary opportunity to acquire data about the life of the port that up to now has never been available in this quality and quantity.
At first it seemed that an entire fleet had perished in the disaster. They found 16 Roman boats and their cargo, several storage jars or amphorae containing foodstuffs, a veritable treasure trove of Roman materials. But then they came across something more sinister trapped by the cargo.
We started by finding the side of this boat. In the area to the north, outside the boat, we found a series of amphora from the cargo. As we removed the amphora, we became aware that in the sediment there was a skeleton of a man and one of a dog.
Di un uomo e di un cane.
The discovery of the skeleton came as quite a shock to the scientists.
Our reaction, above all, was one of surprise, since while in a cemetery or other site it is normal to find skeletons, within the bay of the harbor it is not common, in fact quite the opposite.
Many people may have perished in a single calamitous event, but only this body has survived well intact. This was because during the disaster that sunk the vessel, the body had been buried by the ship's cargo, protecting it from scavenging harbor sea life. Is there anything that we can learn about the man by examining the cargo that preserved his remains?
The vessel was carrying a cargo of amphora, and many of these amphora still had their contents inside them. For example, some were carrying olives, others fruit, while others held sand. Sand of a particular quality which, from analysis that has been carried out, points to the area of the Gulf of Naples as the origin of the boat and its cargo.
But were all 16 ships sunk at the same time? Did they suffer simultaneously at the mercy of a massive natural disaster? Objects found in the cargo enabled the archaeologists to date the ships. Contrary to initial assumptions, this was not a single fleet. These boats had sunk at different times over a period of 1,000 years. Was there anything near the ship the skeleton was found by that placed the deceased accurately within history?
We also had a big stroke of luck because amongst the rocks of the ballast were also found 2 coins, one of which is bronze, minted in 7 BC, which enables a chronology to be placed at around 7 BC.
So the archaeologists were able to confirm that the victim was indeed an ancient Roman who lived during the rule of the Emperor Augustus. Can forensics help Francesca Bertoldi determine the deceased age, physical stature, and even his facial appearance?
We would like to know how old the man was when he died, what pathologies he had. If he had, we can understand something on his physical activities from his skeletal appearance. We can learn something about his race and his facial appearance.
The site of the excavation itself is closed to the public, but you can see the many treasures found there at the Museum of Ships in Pisa, which is solely dedicated to showing the many artifacts found there. The skeleton, however, is kept at the university, where forensic archaeologist Professor Melenier has been studying the remains since their discovery. After careful analysis of the bones, he's able to give Francesca a description of the deceased.
There are many results. First of all is a male, with prominent eyebrows, pronounced cheekbones, very strong lower jaw, very high nose, highly developed cranial capacity, extremely robust bones, especially those of the upper limbs, masculine characteristics, above all the pelvis, femurs, lower limbs, so therefore very robust.
The upper arm and chest bones show robust prominence, a roughening, where large muscle was attached to the bone. This indicates that this was a man used to hard physical labor. So are the archaeologists any closer to defining exactly what his occupation was?
Era sicuramente un marinaio.
He was certainly a sailor. He had certainly been carrying out this kind of activity from an early age because his bones had been modified, modeled by an intense physical activity, which has led to these really strong forms. He had very strong arms, hands, and very strong shoulders.
Forensics has proved that this man had well-developed upper body muscles, clearly caused by his daily toil, the heaving and hauling of sails and ropes, lifting of weights, the pulling of oars. Forensic analysis of the teeth tells the scientists that the man was aged between 35 and 40 when he died. An unusual feature of the incisors also strengthens the argument that this man was a sailor.
The marks on the enamel tell us that he was effectively using his teeth to prepare ropes, leather, small wooden sticks, whose purpose we do not know, but are certainly connected with baskets which have been found in the excavation, ropes, spikes, perhaps for fishing.
First impressions are that this was a working man. But what exactly was his role within the port? Is there anything more that his bones can tell us? Forensic examination of the foot bones shows that the smallest are corrugated and worn. These indicate signs of strains and stresses particular to a sailor's daily toil.
Of particular interest in the lower body is the fact that the feet are accustomed to walking on slippery surfaces, namely wet ones, which is why I maintain he was accustomed to standing on the bridge of a wet ship, which the waves broke over, and that he was used to sliding, that is, not falling over on a wet slippery surface.
If this man was indeed a sailor, could this shed some light on the presence of the dog? Francesca Bertoldi is curious to know if it was a guard dog or simply a pet, the man's best friend.
Perché un cane sulle navi? E di che razza era questo cane? Possiamo saperlo?
Well, looking at its shape, the proportion of the limbs compared with the chest, we can guess that this dog was fairly similar to the dachshunds of the present day. These dogs were probably used on boats because they could catch mice and rats. These small dogs were able to get in between huge ceramic containers, and they were probably able to seek out these big mice, and this would therefore lead to the choice of dogs of this shape.
Questo aveva portato appunto a una selezione dei cani di questa forma.
Forensic analysis has given Francesca Bertoldi a clearer picture of both man and beast. The bones can also help her get a clearer picture of the man's facial appearance.
From the skeleton, we can learn about the real appearance of his face, because we can reconstruct the muscles behind that lie above the bone, and we can fill the gap with plasticine and try to reconstruct the whole appearance of the face of the dead.
By applying techniques used in forensic detective work, using wooden pegs and plasticine, the scientists can reconstruct the sailor's face.
We'll first reconstruct the thickness of the soft tissues above this bone and applying wooden pegs on the bone. And then the gaps between the muscles will be filled with plasticine. And after that, we'll try to reconstruct nose and the mouth. And at the end, we have the physical appearance of the deceased, of the sailor.
Soon we will be able to see the face of this ancient mariner, who died alongside his loyal dog at the mercy of a catastrophic event. The clearest picture of the only surviving casualty of this event is coming to fruition with the completion of the clay model facial reconstruction. The human instinct to capture the likeness of friends, family, and the rich and famous is ages old. Some ancient people were honest about their subjects, depicting them warts and all, while others were more flattering.
We have the case of the Greeks, who idealized the appearance of their people, their men and their women, making them extremely beautiful according to a particular concept of beauty. The Romans, however, and this was a Roman boat, reproduced their features, their actual features. And so, with this particular methodology used by American legal medicine, we wanted to see if this turned out to be a face that we have already seen in Roman imagery.
Will the sailor look typically Roman? Or might he have belonged to another race, whose nation may have been colonized by the Roman Empire?
Ho avuto l'impressione di vedere.
I had the impression of seeing someone I had already seen before. So this meant, in fact, it was an Italian. That is, at least an individual with an Italian face, which is not very different from Italians in the past.
Che non è poi molto diversa da quella degli italiani di un tempo.
So we are part of the people which in broad terms has been the same for thousands of years.
Grosso modo è sempre stata la stessa da qualche migliaio di anni.
But what kind of world did this Roman sailor inhabit? Roman historian Dr. Simon James paints a vivid picture.
His world was very much like the Mediterranean today, a world of many peoples and nations and many languages. But of course, at that time, it was dominated by Roman power. The Romans ruled the whole of the Mediterranean basin, and he would have not seen probably any territories that were not under Roman domination.
140 miles south of San Rossore, on the outskirts of Rome, is the ancient harbor of Portus. Portus, unlike the site of San Rossore, has been archaeologically preserved. It is central to understanding the vast scale of trade and transport within the Roman Empire. It also gives us a picture of a typical Roman port, the kind of environment in which the sailor died. Not much of the original port survives, apart from a few walls, but visitors can walk through where the original wharfs, docks, and canals were during ancient times, an enjoyable way today of sensing the magnitude of Roman maritime power.
What we see here at Portus is an imperial harbour. It's something that's actually financed by the state itself, and it is on an appropriately enormous scale. It reflects not only the engineering skill and ingenuity of the Romans in being able to construct this facility, but also the fact they needed such a facility simply to supply the foodstuffs for the capital.
Not enough food could be grown around Rome to feed the city's large population. The capital had to be supplied by imports from across the sea, so the Romans brought here much of the agricultural output from its imperial territories. An impressive collection of Roman maritime vessels, ships' oil lamps, and storage jars can be visited at the Museum of the Roman Ships of Fiumicino just outside Rome. It's another opportunity to witness the tremendous capabilities of ancient Rome.
But that stupendous effort that went on every year, it was only one part, the biggest single part, but only one part of the great maritime trading network that spanned the entire Mediterranean basin. At least as much again, probably several times more such quantities of material were being moved between smaller harbours, places like Pisa.
The Roman sailor who died in Pisa was therefore a small cog in the huge machine that was the Roman Empire. But on board what sort of trading vessel did he work? What business might the ship have been involved in on the day of the disaster?
From the look of the cargo, I would imagine that this was a small coastal vessel which was going from harbour to harbour up the coast of Italy.
The scene at San Rossore port then would have looked similar to that of some Italian harbours today.
So one can imagine a very busy harbour scene into which our relatively small coastal vessel is threading its way to find its mooring, drop anchor, and then unload its goods probably into small boats to go off to the wharves and to the warehouses of Pisa town.
The drowned man must have been part of this scene. But what exactly was the event that killed him?
There's always the possibility that this wreck went down as a result of a very dramatic event. For example, something like a tidal wave associated with an earthquake or something like that. Even in a harbour, you can have a disaster. So, for example, in AD 62 at Portus, we're told in one of the Roman texts that 200 ships were wrecked in the harbour as a result of a massive storm. So perhaps the ship, partly unloaded, was caught by a Mediterranean storm. Very big winds and waves, it may have just caused it to heel over, the cargo shifted and the whole thing went down.
There is one more piece of evidence that might be able to tell us how the sailor died. The strangest aspect of the sailor's skeleton is that there is only one foot present. How did he lose his foot? The possibilities of this being an old injury or former surgical amputation were soon ruled out when archaeologists found the skeletal remains of the foot lying about a yard away from the rest of the body.
Well, this is very important because when in visiting the site, Professor Mallegni realized that one of the man's feet was lying 1 meter close to his leg and in perfect anatomical connection. This is the real important part of it.
The fact that the sailor's foot was in good condition and hadn't simply eroded away from the rest of his body in the years after his death gives Francesca a vital clue.
Because the foot was in perfect anatomical connection and lying 1 meter away from him, we suppose that there was an accident before the man's death, or maybe during the man's death. Possibly his foot was trapped in a rope and he fell and the foot was torn off.
It must have been a sudden violent event that was powerful enough to have torn the mariner's foot off.
Presuppongo che si sia tagliato nel momento che
I assume he was struck at the moment he was drowning, that is, he was dying.
Quando il carico ha premuto sopra il suo corpo.
When the cargo fell on top of his body, pressing him into the ground, a shroud or a rope, probably connected to something that could have been the sail, tightened, creating a slip knot.
Creando un nodo scorsoio.
The impact was so strong that it pulled the foot from the tibia.
We know it was a huge, sudden event that injured and killed this man and his dog. But what exactly was it? A tidal wave? An earthquake? A flash flood? It seems that the geography of the area around San Rosari could help us be more precise.
Probably it is the nature of the dock, because it is on a bend in the river Auser, where it was subject, as it is today, to heavy flooding during the winter and the autumn, due to rainfall upstream. So this was a heavy flood, which was common in the Auser as it is in the Arno. And so he burst into the dock, and it could be that the boat was badly loaded, or at least it hit the boat sideways on, pushing the keel back and then wrecking everything in the dock.
Rovesciando poi il tutto dentro questo bacino.
So it was the port's location at the confluence of two rivers that set the scene for the disaster that was to befall San Rosari and killed the sailor and his dog. Freak storms and a flash flood most likely broke the banks of the rivers Arno and Auser and sank the ancient mariner's ship. Francesca Bertoldi's investigation has now allowed her to piece together the likely scenario surrounding the death of the ancient mariner and his dog.
We suppose that during the tidal wave, he fell out of the ship, this is for sure, and the cargo fell over him and trapped him, so probably he drowned. And while he was falling, he tried to grab the dog. This is also for sure. And this is very moving, really, because it gives you an insight in every single moment of this tragedy.
It is this simple action of desperately reaching out for his dog that tugs at the heartstrings. It gives us a glimpse into the character of this ancient mariner who perished over 2,000 years ago.
Another thing that touches us more closely is the fact that he had tried to save his little friend, the dog, carrying it, however, to a sad end that they met together and where they remained together forever, right up to the present day.
After 2,000 years, the ancient mariner rises from the deep. Forensic detective analysis has helped to flesh out the skeleton of this Roman sailor, build a portrait of the man and the world he lived in and the way he died. The secrets that lie behind this mask of death give us a rare and valuable snapshot in time. In the hot, arid landscape of northern Syria, archaeologists have made a startling and mysterious discovery. they've uncovered an ancient tomb, undisturbed for 4,300 years. Who are the 8 occupants of this tomb buried with gold and silver treasures? Could this be a royal tomb? Or are they the victims of murder or ritual sacrifice?
A young woman and a baby and another young woman and a baby, the symmetry is quite striking.
The king could have indicated his victory over his competitors by killing them.
It's definitely an injury to a person that occurred very shortly before they actually died.
Professor Glenn Swartz is on a mission to uncover the story behind a spectacular Syrian tomb containing the bodies of 2 men, 2 women, 3 babies, and 1 other adult. He wants to unravel this mystery that dates back to the very dawn of urban civilization.
Are these rich women members of royalty? Why did they die the way that they did? Is there some kind of ritual sacrifice involved? Could there have been an epidemic? Were these people related? Is a family mausoleum? There are so many questions that we need to investigate, and that's what I want to try to do now.
Syria is a land as old as time itself. Situated at the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, its vast interior desert plains are bounded to the northwest by snow-capped mountains. Still today in the bustling city souks, the covered marketplaces, tradesmen sell exotic fruits, herbs, and spices. Craftsmen weave rich textiles. Copper, gold, and precious metals are bought and sold. Beyond are the vast dusty plains where there are villages of mud-brick beehive houses and goat herds tending their flocks, a way of life that has changed little since before the time of Christ. Dr. Glenn Swartz of the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore has come to this exotic location in search of answers to an ancient mystery. He is co-director of the team that unearthed an intact tomb situated near the small Syrian village of al-Mara. Glenn has been excavating al-Mara for several years. He believes that it could be the site of the ancient city of Tuba, which is mentioned in many Middle Eastern and Egyptian texts dating from the 3rd millennium BC, the age of the Great Pyramids. Glenn and his team made their breakthrough discovery while excavating a hill which showed signs of once having been the site of a necropolis.
We knew that it was walled in the Middle Bronze period, around 1800 BC, so we thought there must be some important building in the middle. So we dug there, and we didn't find an important building. So I told my graduate student, Alice Petty, well, just keep digging, see what you get, maybe it'll be more interesting. And she kept digging, and she hit some bones, so we realized, you know, these were human bones, and say, oh, it's a tomb.
They continued to dig and discovered several complete clay pots, unusual in that they were intact. This confirmed their suspicions that they were unearthing a tomb. Then they discovered metal.
At first we thought these were bronze objects, then we took a closer look, we realized they were silver. I thought, there's something important here. And then we got lapis lazuli objects, and those are very highly valued objects in antiquity. And then Barbara Stewart, who was excavating the tomb, she came back one day and said, guess what, there's gold in this tomb. So, okay, this is really an unusual and quite remarkable discovery.
The presence of gold in lapis lazuli, a beautiful blue semi-precious stone, may indicate that this was the tomb of wealthy, high-ranking people. The tomb was comprised of 3 layers. On the top layer, they found 2 women adorned in the gold and lapis lazuli jewelry. Lying close to each woman were the remains of a tiny baby. Below this layer, the team discovered the remains of a 3rd baby and 2 adult men, one of whom was buried with a bronze dagger. The 3rd and lowest level held an adult with a silver cup and silver pins.
Well, we realized after we'd finished excavating this tomb that we had quite a number of interesting and important results, and also that there were a number of mysteries that had to be solved, really. For example, why was there a difference between the women, these richly bedecked women, and the men underneath who seemed to be much poorer? Why did each of the women have a baby? Why were each of the women of the same age? So all sorts of ideas of, say, ritual sacrifice might have entered the picture, or an epidemic. So these were the sorts of questions that we had to try to answer and get more, closer analysis of the material.
The tomb site at el-Mara lies 25 miles east of the busy Arabic city of Aleppo. Benefiting from its geographical location on the trade route between the Mediterranean Sea and southern Mesopotamia, the city was the perfect place for trading food, spices, and raw materials, such as copper, silver, and gold. Scattered around the modern cityscape are hints of history, mosques and minarets, from which the muezzins sing the haunting call to prayer. And impregnable citadel walls that go back to the times of the Crusades.
Aleppo has a long series of very rich, different cultures that occupied the city and influenced its life, and you can see that in the vital character of the cosmopolitan town that it is today. And we are interested in el-Mara in investigating the very beginnings of urban civilization in Syria, which in fact is one of the earliest urban civilizations in the world. This happens around 2500 BC or so.
Could the occupants of the tomb have belonged to the elite of one of the earliest civilizations, as Glenn's team uncovered the tomb of two princesses? The development of some of the world's first urban civilizations began in southern Mesopotamia in the 4th millennium BC. It gradually spread further north, along the trade route to the Mediterranean, into what is now northern Syria. Slowly, people began to make the shift from small farming villages to large cities. These city-states relied on huge flocks of domesticated livestock and the development of farming. Most of these resources were controlled by elite families and royalty who coexisted in a perpetual state of rivalry. Could the remains that Glenn is investigating have belonged to one of these elite families? Could they have been royalty? What made this new discovery quite so remarkable was that Glenn and his team may have unearthed an elite or even royal tomb, which had apparently remained undisturbed since it was sealed over 4,000 years ago. So who were the occupants of this tomb, and how had they died?
One of the things that occurred to me was perhaps that these were, say, princesses or elite women at the top who were buried along with attendants or servants who may well have been sacrificed to accompany their mistresses into the next world.
The arrangement of the bodies and the tomb itself, with its layers apparently organized by social rank, could certainly support the theory that these young women were princesses and that the men had been killed to accompany them in death. But this does not explain the death of the women.
A young woman and a baby and another young woman and a baby, the symmetry is quite striking. So you could try to come up with some idea of ritual sacrifice involving the women, not the men. Perhaps they're the ones that were killed.
In need of more evidence, Glenn has returned to the excavation headquarters at el-Mara. He has invited forensic experts, Dr. Bruno Froelich of the Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C., and Dr. Judith Littleton of Auckland University, New Zealand, to study the remains of each of the 8 bodies.
Individual A, the exoskeleton. So Bruno, you want the adult bones over there, right, with you?
Assisted by Barbara Stewart of the excavation team, they set to work, examining in detail the 4,000-year-old bones. Bruno Froelich is as familiar with modern police work as he is with archaeological inquiry, regularly assisting the Vermont State Police Force with murder investigations. In this case, his and Judith's work is made difficult by the fact that the skeletal remains have been ravaged by time, many of the bones now being in fragments. Will their expertise provide Glenn with any new clues or surprises? They first attempt to determine the age of the occupants. Long bones, leg and arm bones, will give them the best indication.
In children and infants, we do it by measuring the long bones, because children grow when you reach 16, 17, 18 years of age, you probably do not grow much more. So we use other criteria. And in this case here, in one of the infant burials, it's probably newborn, stillborn maybe.
Determining the sex of an individual from ancient remains is more difficult.
And the best indicator of sex is always going to be the pelvis. Okay? But in an excavation situation, the pelvis is generally poorly preserved. It's a fragile bone, it's very flat. So for some of the individuals, we've got parts of the cranium, we've got some measurements like the head of the femur where it articulates into the hip. For the infants, of course, there's no way of getting sex morphologically with any certainty. So even the sort of ancient DNA work that you could do on sets has a fairly high error rate because of the problems of extracting DNA.
Early on in the investigation, the two forensic experts had difficulty determining the sex of one of the two adult bodies on the top level of the tomb.
That's a male.
But look at that orbit.
Yeah.
I looked at the eye of the orbit, which looks very female. It's underdeveloped. It's got quite a sharp upper edge. At the same time, Bruno was lifting up the mastoid, which is around here, and thinking, this is pretty big. And I'm looking at the orbit thinking, this is really small. So, you know, based on that, we've ended up with a dispute.
This is a female.
Okay, whoever it is young.
Eventually, they agree that this is a woman.
I'll put a question mark after it because we don't have any...
okay.
So what is the evidence in favor of that identification?
That is a female?
Yeah.
Small?
It's
Small.
the bones are very fragile, very thin.
And that's it?
Oh, that's all?
The remains of the other top layer individual shows signs of having had a pathological condition, which has wasted much of the body and lower limbs.
There's something wrong with all of them. They're all flattened close to a proximal.
The disease has affected the growth of the bones. It makes identification of age and sex, based on average size comparisons, very difficult. The scientists wonder if this condition could account for the small size of the baby that was found with this individual. Bruno and Judith are unable to come to a definitive decision on the sex of this person.
So I think we would say sex is unknown.
Okay.
Then, on the same skeleton, Judith notices something interesting. It appears to be an injury, perhaps a sign of violence. Could this be a clue to the cause of death of these two women?
We've got a cut all the way along the back of the ulna. Okay, so it's actually the back of this elbow here. Okay, now that's a fresh cut. Okay, it's sharp. Okay, so it's clearly signs of trauma. Now it could be after the excavation or it could be before, but the reason we think it's before the person died is that it's actually cut across some infection on the bone, so there's a bit of porosity on the bone. But here, you've got signs where the bone has actually started to heal after it's been cut. So it's definitely an injury to a person that occurred very shortly before they actually died. So whether it contributed to the death or not, there's certainly, it's the first sign of violence that we've seen on all of the skeletons that we've got.
Could this be the sign of an attack with a knife? Such injuries on the forearms are often found on victims who have attempted to defend themselves from a knife attack by holding their arms up in front of them. Bruno is not convinced.
In this case, we're dealing with a person where we have a lot of diseases going on in the body, and the bones are very thin, the bones are smaller than they should be, okay? And so maybe the bone is very weak. This person may just have fallen on the road and hit a stone with elbow and broke it because the bone is weak to begin with.
So the forensic analysis has shown that the two women may have suffered from a bone disorder, but the two men from the middle layer seem to have been young and healthy. But what of the skeleton on the lower level? There was initially some debate among the archaeologists as to the sex of this individual, but Judith is convinced it's a female.
The individual down the bottom, okay, is a woman. She's middle-aged. She's been working, okay? She hasn't been sitting around doing nothing all her life. And one of the things she's been doing is using her teeth as tools. So she's been consistently using this side of her mouth as either as a handle for pulling. She's been pulling fibres or she's been holding things in her mouth while she's been working. And that's rather distinctive from all of those younger individuals above. And that might tie in with the sort of excavator's idea that there is some break or some distension between the lower skeleton and then the upper two layers of skeletons.
Perhaps these signs of bodily wear and tear suggest that this individual was a servant in life. Did the people on the upper levels, perhaps royalty, show signs of a more pampered existence, protected from life's hardships?
I don't think they had that easy a life. At some point during childhood, their growth has actually stopped, either because there's been a period of infection, they've been sick for a while, or they've had some nutritional stress. So you're not talking about a group of individuals who are totally buffered from life stresses.
Royalty or not, these people were living in a harsh environment. If disease spread or crops failed, they would not necessarily have been immune to physical hardship. Glenn is eager to know if it can be proved that any of the individuals were related. This is very difficult to determine without collecting and analyzing DNA material from the bones. Unfortunately, their age and poor preservation means that this may not be possible. However, Bruno discovers a clue which may shed some light on the matter.
We found some spina bifida, and this is a kind of a genetical disorder, mostly found in the lower vertebra or backbones. We found it in 2 of the cases out of 4 or 5 adults. And that's a little suspicious, and that may indicate that there's some relationship between at least those 2 persons. But it's not enough to make a final conclusion.
Glenn now has a mass of new material to consider. What does he make of it?
The health of these people is interesting, or I should say the ill health, that even the women at the top that we thought were princesses, they didn't have such an easy life, and they had this evidence of stunted growth, so that's interesting. And also the lady at the bottom with the marks of rope or something on her teeth. We have to wonder what she was doing, what kind of action that entailed, maybe textile production, which we know is very important in this society.
The forensics is just one part of the story. Now Glenn needs to examine the artifacts found with the bodies to see if they can tell him more about the rank of these people and the type of burial ritual which may have been involved. Glenn's next stop is the National Museum at Aleppo, which houses most of the archaeological treasures found in Syria over the years. It's also home to many riches that were found in the tomb at el-Mara. The jewelry covering the bodies on the top layer is magnificent in materials and design. These 2 beautiful gold pendants show a high level of craftsmanship, suggesting that they may well have been made in another region and then purchased by a rich family in el-Mara. One of the women wore a gold headband and a gold bracelet, complete with a fastening clasp. They were also adorned with lapis lazuli beads, the most spectacular being this one, carved in the shape of an ibex, a kind of wild goat. The preciousness of these objects suggests that the occupants of this tomb could have belonged to the elite of one of the earliest urban civilizations. Could this valuable jewelry have been ritual offerings sent with the bodies to the world of the dead? Could the treasures point to a case of ritual sacrifice? Hans Curvers is a member of the team which unearthed the tomb at el-Mara. He has been studying its treasures in detail. Can they give many clues as to the status of the individuals under examination?
Well, the tomb that we have excavated, for instance, included a lapis lazuli ibex. And this lapis lazuli comes from Central Asia, Badakhshan. Through Iran, it reaches southern Mesopotamia, the modern Iraq, and then it is found in the area of northern Syria where we are excavating. So this shows that people had access to this trade system. And so that's how we have to assume that they belong to the leadership of their little petty kingdom that was located or centered around el-Mara.
At el-Mara, perhaps the site of the ancient city of Tuba, residents would have acquired wealth primarily through farming and the control of trade routes. The critical factor in the development of cities was the ability to create surplus food, allowing people to have roles other than food production. The many crops and enormous herds of sheep and goats could also provide products to be used for trade. Other cities of ancient Mesopotamia were dominated by powerful families that controlled their most important resources. Were the inhabitants of the el Mara tomb members of such an elite? Perhaps the young women in the tomb were pawns, caught up in the power politics of feuding royal families. Glenn meets with Hans to discuss the fate of the princesses.
Are these princesses from the Aleppo area?
Yeah, I think the Ebla texts actually talk about the exchange of women between.
How and why did they die? One possibility is that they were ceremonially poisoned, a practice which existed in southern Mesopotamia around this time. Perhaps they were stabbed. The injury to the forearm of one of the young women could have been a sign of self-defense against an assailant's knife. Of course, it is possible that they died of natural causes. We know their remains showed signs of weakness and disease. So could this be simply a family tomb? The tomb at el Mara was built on top of a hill. This tomb would have been part of an imposing building complex that may have been the central feature of the city's layout. The complex would have been difficult to ignore.
As an archaeologist, you have to try to tell the story that is behind this tomb. So if we go back to, let's say, the power relations that these people had, you could use, let's say, a struggle for power. And one of the competitors could have indicated his victory over his competitors by killing them in a kind of ritual. And actually also building a tomb, building a memorial of this incident on the side, which would fit into the tribal tradition.
So could this have been a case of a rival killing two princesses, their infants and entourage, and instead of disposing of their bodies, housing them in a grand tomb to be seen throughout the city? By burying the resident royal family with full honor, a new incumbent to the throne could perhaps assume power without provoking the opposition of the people. Ironically, for this scenario to be true, the new rulers would have had to have been willing to bury with the corpses the extraordinary jewels and ornaments found in the el Mara tomb. The importance of religious ritual might provide an answer to this paradox. Glenn returns to the site of the tomb to consider what he's learned. Does he believe that these were princesses killed by foreign enemies?
If you look at the text from the ancient Near East, when kings kill their enemies, they usually don't bury them with a lot of respect. In fact, they boast about making piles of corpses of their enemies. So I would tend to think if they were killed, it probably was an inside job. Maybe a jealous queen getting rid of rival concubines and perhaps disguising the fact that they were murdered. So they're buried with respect, but still gotten out of the way. I tend to favor, at the moment, an explanation that involves a consideration of the architecture of the tomb, that is, the way that it stands high up. It must have played an important role in the community after the death of these people, and of course it's in the center of the community too. So I think what we might be dealing with here are elite princesses who died and then were venerated long after their deaths in this freestanding mausoleum.